Part 1. The Suspect. There's this scene in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia that haunts me. In it, the gang is having some dispute over who should do the dishes and decide to go to this counselor/therapist so she could act as an arbiter and tell them which one should do it. Each of the characters in turn walks into the office to share a view of their personal world. Except for Frank. Frank is having none of that. The gang's most debauched and, frankly, demented character sits down and declares to the therapist that he won't let her get into his head, that he doesn't like talking about the past. In classic Philly fashion, Frank immediately starts talking about extremely personal and traumatic events from his childhood, with almost no coercion from the therapist. And it's funny, don't get me wrong, but then they take it a little bit further. The story that Frank tells is about the time that he was accidentally sent to a school for the mentally disabled, in which he and the other patients were treated horribly. But it gets worse. Frank's story reaches a climax with the death of his first kiss, a girl who seemed to have been horribly disfigured as well as mentally disabled, a death that he could have easily prevented were he there at the time. She pretended to be an astronaut, you see, using a plastic bag for a helmet. At this point, Frank stops trying to relay information. The story of what happened to him isn't important anymore. It never was. It could have been anything. The important thing is the way that Frank reacts to his own recollection, the depiction of a man locked within his own mind with a memory that he simply can't handle. It illuminates the entire character differently, even though we never heard of this event before. This is something that Frank constantly needs to escape from, and the need to avoid it might explain why Frank is whatever the hell he is. This basic character blueprint is surprisingly common. Let's look at a few examples. Heads up, major spoilers for True Detective Season 1 and Mad Max Fury Road, minor spoilers for Better Call Saul and Rick and Morty. Rick's entire personality is arguably a defense mechanism preventing him from engaging with his past, specifically the death of his wife, which he failed to protect. Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is riddled with unprocessed trauma over the death of his son that he failed to prevent. In the end of Fury Road, Max, in my interpretation, which you can watch me elaborate on, admits that he can't heal from his trauma. And what's the trauma? Failing to save a bunch of children. My personal close friend Friedrich motherfucking Nietzsche, who we're going to talk about later in this video, spent the last of his days in a catatonic state caused by a nervous breakdown. And what caused said nervous breakdown? I don't know for a fact that the story is true, but we're talking about narratives, not history, so I'm gonna tell it anyway. According to legend, Fred saw a cart rider beating his already exhausted and underfed horse, striking and striking at the beast that could not move anymore. Nitz, according to the story, ran to the beast and hugged its neck in a sort of camaraderie of the downtrodden, then lost consciousness and never returned to his old self. But although all of these men suffer from trauma over their failure to protect the helpless, not all of these characters are created equal. Frank Reynolds is a joke. He is capable of nothing aside from crawling in the sewers and fixing a paper jam, and I don't really like him as a human being. Rick is inhumanly capable, but he is narcissistic and dishonest, and I wouldn't want him as a friend. Max, Mike, and Fred all have their flaws, but the more they try to help other people, the more I'm enamored with them. Just like a cookie needs sugar, fat, and salt to really kick your brain into high gear, I propose that this type of character needs 3 ingredients in the right ratio in order to work: trauma, capability, and willingness. The trauma over failing to help the helpless, the capability being a capability for violence, and the willingness, of course, being the willingness to help. What is it about this archetype? Why am I fascinated by it? Why are you fascinated by it? I'd like to ask the most important question that a scientist can ask themselves. What's going on here? In order to answer that, we're going to analyze the character that is, in my opinion, the epitome of this archetype. Rustin Cohle from True Detective not only contains the three ingredients, but he has each of the three in greater quantities than any of the other characters we talked about. His trauma trumps those of Rick, Ehrmantraut, and even Max. It is his own 2-year-old daughter who dies, being more helpless than Rick's wife, more dependent on him than Ehrmantraut's grown-up son. The connection between Max and the kids he fails to save is unclear, but it doesn't seem like they are his offspring. While Rick is technically capable of more violence, it is cartoonish in nature, and I don't mean just because it's animated. The type of violence Rust is capable of is absolutely ferocious, while being perfectly controlled. I can believe that people like that exist, but I don't think they are common. And third, the willingness to help. The act of helping defines everything in Rust's life. While Ehrmantraut can still chill out with his granddaughter and have a genuinely good time, Rust doesn't have anything but the bare necessities. His only books are about how to be a better detective. He only takes drugs to sleep, so he can keep functioning, scoring again higher than any of the other examples. But a character does not exist in a vacuum. It is a part of a text, and unless it was created by an amateur, the character was created specifically to complement the plot, narrative, and world of said text. What is True Detective, and why does it need a character like Rust? Let's follow the clues. Part 2. Investigation. True Detective is a show about detectives and truth. Great analysis, I know. It uses a framing device in which Rustin Cohle and Marty Hart, two detectives that used to be partners in the years 1995 to 2002, are both being questioned 17 years later about a murder case that they investigated at the time and the events surrounding it. This framing is highly effective. Not only does it create intrigue by letting us know that Papania and Gilboa, the detectives questioning Rust and Marty, are looking for something in these stories, but by presenting us with the older versions of Rusty and Mart, we get to see what the events did to these people. Well, mainly what they did to Rustin Cohle, who seems, as his name suggests, to be deteriorating. Marty Hart seems, on the surface, to be doing alright. Let's add that to our list of questions. Why did the events take such a toll on one detective, but not on the other? Before I recap, I want to first talk about the show's theme, lying. Every detective show is bound to have some lying, but in True Detective there is a lot. And I mean a lot. Some dialogues consist of lies alone.
Oh, yeah? Stay for dinner, Russ. No, I think I gotta get.
While others are a back and forth of lying and accusations of lying.
It's good to see you.
Bullshit.
Even when it's not about police business. The ability to detect lies is crucial to the plot, and the show uses every opportunity it gets to put the viewer in that state of mind, whether they consciously notice or not. At one point, this dude who Rust is holding hostage is forced to lie about why his face is so bruised. Showing true dedication to the theme, the lie the writers come up with is,
I'd called the wrong dude on cheating.
He is lying about wrongly detecting a lie. When Cohle describes the scariest gang he ever worked as a narc, he describes what they would do to people who betrayed them. Now, of all the different kinds of torture actual gangs in the real world use, this gang's favorite punishment was to peel someone's face off and put a mirror in front of them so they could see what they really looked like under the facade. For me, this kind of theme cohesiveness is just extremely enjoyable. I just really like noticing every time the writers give that signal and point it out, even to myself. It's like a game you can play while watching, but I also believe, and that's not a word I use lightly, I believe that it has a positive effect on the viewer, even if they don't notice it. Citation needed, I guess? So this is our first clue. This is a show about deception. Now as we go through this recap, let's see if we can use that clue to answer our question. What is the difference between the protagonists in relation to lying? On the first episode, Papania and Gilboa question Rust and Marty about the beginning of their partnership. On their third case together, Rust and Marty are called onto the scene of what is obviously neither suicide nor accident. They find the body of Dora Lang that has been tortured with shallow stab wounds, marked with strange symbology, and, as they would later find out, drugged with meth and acid. Rust connects the dots into a hypothesis of a serial killer that has murdered before, while Marty accuses him of conjecture. Rust, by the way, uses this huge notebook, unlike most detectives who make do with a small notepad. This shows his understanding that his own memory is flawed, something few people are comfortable admitting. In the car, Marty starts asking Rust about his personal life and philosophy. Rust tries to avoid the subject, but after Marty insists, Rust says what sounds to me like honest, if inaccurate, truth. Humanity is an accident and would be better off if we all just stopped reproducing. Marty doesn't so much retort as just disqualify the opinion as being abhorrent, obscene. He sides with the Christian worldview. Remember that for later. On the first episode, Marty is already shown to be a little absent from his own marriage, but worse, he doesn't notice his wife's frustration with him. His wife, Maggie, insists that Rust come over for dinner, and he does, but he arrives drunk. Why? What is the part of reality that is hard for him to look directly at? When he does sit down, he is honest with Maggie and vulnerable, and Maggie loves that. That is the thing that she is missing in her own marriage. Marty recognizes that dynamic between them and resents it. So by the end of the first episode, we see Rust as more truthful, more observant than Marty, but the difference isn't that big. On the second episode, some truths rise to the surface. Marty is cheating on his wife, which naturally means lying to his wife about it. Rust detects the cheating, noticing that Marty has not changed his clothes since yesterday, as well as a specific smell, and he points that out in the same way you and I would tell a friend that they have their shirt on backwards. Marty sees it differently, though. Rust's acknowledgement makes Marty feel vulnerable to judgment, a key element of his psychology. Of all the ways this physical altercation could have gone, the writers found a way to make this conflict, once again, about lie detection. And I love this show so much. Instead of breaking Marty's wrists, Rust claims that he can break them, then asks, "Does it seem to you like I'm lying?" This continues the line of Rust seeming to speak only the truth, a line that breaks before the second episode is over, when we catch him on a lie for the first time. The detectives Papania and Gilboa ask Rust about the time that he spent in a psychiatric hospital, to which he responds with a casual, "Do you want to hear about that? Who gives a shit?" That is, implying that the memory isn't emotionally painful for him. The chain of events is simple enough. Rust lost his only child, Sophia, which later caused him to, in a fit of misplaced rage, shoot a drug addict that was injecting his own daughter with crystal meth. Rust gets offered to work as a high-risk narc instead of going to prison and takes the offer. After 4 years of working as a narc, which is an extremely long period, Rust takes 3 bullets in a shootout and gets admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Lubbock, Texas. These are the dry facts. But when Rust tries to talk about the death of his daughter, that he still sees as his own fault, he finds that he can't. He's stuck. He can't talk about the worst day of his life. It hurts too much. He can't detach from it, and so he skips the most painful part. But that wasn't even a lie, technically. A lie would have been a false statement, like, "I don't give a shit." Rust is capable of lying, being a healthy human being over the age of 3. But from this one scene alone, it seems like he's really bad at it. It's no coincidence that in this specific scene, we hear about Rust's 4 years of working undercover as a narc. That is, 4 years of pretending not to be a cop in front of dangerous criminals that would hurt him if they found out. We are told that he can lie, but seeing is believing, and we don't really see it. Until the boxman scene. Cohle is shown and not told to be an excellent boxman, the title or the function of a person who extracts a confession from a suspect within the interrogation room, aka the box, hence the name. Rust is often called in to perform that job on behalf of others. His ability to read through people's lies makes him very effective at extracting confessions. In this scene, we see Rust working the suspect. He is weirdly intimate with him, but very compassionate. He explains to the suspect that his crime is, in fact, not his fault, that there is evil inside of him that he can't control. Rust's philosophy seems to be laid bare in front of us. I remember thinking what a clever way that is to let us see into Rust's mind and soul. a way that complements the talks Marty and Rust have in the car. And then Rust says this: "You must ask God for forgiveness." Wait, what? This is completely antithetical to Cohle's point of view, as described to Marty in the car. We are shown not only that Rust can lie, but that he's really good at it. For a moment, we need to consider how much Rust has been lying to us. Maybe he does believe in God and has been lying to Marty all the time. Unlikely, as his atheism has brought him nothing but grief, and lying to the suspect about God got him what he needed. Side note, an important recurring sub-theme is that lying to people that God exists is a pretty good way to get them to do what you want. By the end of the second episode, Maggie knows that Marty is cheating but doesn't say anything. That is, she pretends not to know. Marty either fails to notice or chooses not to. An anti-Christian crimes task force is put together by the Christian Tuttle Foundation, and the police chief offers our detectives the chance to get the case off their backs and give it to the task force. Rust smells something off about the task force and insists not to give the case away. Marty backs him up and the investigation continues, but on a deadline. If they don't find something substantial soon, the investigation will be taken from them. This drives Rust to chain together a couple of all-nighters, looking at old case files and inspecting the pictures of women that have been found dead, but their cases were closed. Their deaths were regarded as suicides and accidents, or simply closed for lack of evidence. Looking at the bodies, old Rust recalls, put young Rust in a pretty bad headspace. It was as if his ability to get into people's heads still worked, even when they were dead. And he spent hours and hours wondering what it would be like to accept death. That part is more important than I initially understood. Finally, Rust finds a match in another girl who has been drugged with meth and acid, just like Dora Lang, endured the same shallow stab wounds, and was marked with similar symbols. After asking a relative, the detectives connect the girl to an ex-boyfriend, Reggie Ledoux, who is known to the police for manufacturing meth and acid. Not only that, but he spent time in prison with Dora Lang's husband. The detectives go to speak to Dora Lang's widower, who tells them A. that he showed Reggie pictures of his ex-wife, establishing a connection. B. that Reggie told him about a cult that sacrifices children, about the Yellow King and Carcosa, though the husband didn't understand what any of those meant. And C. the name of somebody who might know how to find Reggie. This leads us to episode 4, but before we continue with the plot, I'd like to take a short moment to finally answer our third question.
You know the real difference between you and me?
So, what do we have so far? Marty lies to his wife about having an affair. He lies to his lover about his intentions regarding his wife. Rust, as far as we know, only lies to suspects. What's the difference? Is it simply that Rust is good and Marty is kind of selfish? Rust actually answers that question half a second after Marty asks.
You know the real difference between you and me?
Yeah. Denial.
But that one-word answer doesn't really help explain it. Luckily, Maggie helps clear that up for us.
I wonder if you even know you're lying.
On a very literal level, that seems to make no sense. How can someone lie, that is, knowingly utter a false statement without knowing about it? As a child, I remember that variations on the phrase lying to themselves seemed to me completely idiotic. I knew that a person could technically lie to themselves if they talk to themselves and intentionally say something false, like 2 + 2 = 5. But that's not what people meant. They meant that somebody is successfully deceiving themselves, which just didn't seem logically possible. Every child, even a technically oriented child like I was, realizes at some point that human beings are just super weird. It seems that the trick of lying to oneself isn't in what's being said, but in the temporary deactivation of the lie detector when it comes to their own bullshit. This has to be done subconsciously, of course. Or, as Maggie puts it,
You have developed some sort of selective deafness.
Notice that Maggie says developed, not I swear you have some type of selective deafness. This one word is extremely important to understanding what happened to Marty. He wasn't always so good at blocking away reality. This is a skill that he developed while working in homicide. What have I done to deserve to witness such good writing in my lifetime? The writers, in fact, make sure to notify us of Marty's nature as soon as the first half of the first episode. If you were in the writer's stead, how would you communicate to the audience that this person is a master of self-deception, that he cannot see himself for what he is? Here's what they chose to do.
We all fit a certain category. The bully, the charmer, the surrogate dad, the man possessed by ungovernable rage.
Which type were you?
Oh, I was just a regular type dude.
But a regular type dude was not one of the presented options just a second ago. He is simply unable to consciously acknowledge who he is. Subconsciously, though, notice what is the first type that he mentions, the bully, which, by the end of episode 3, he proves to us to be a diagnosis. When he sees his lover going on a date with a guy her age, he breaks into her apartment and assaults the man in a fit of rage that he doesn't even bother excusing. At this point, Marty's self-deception is so obvious it hurts to watch. Rust, on the other hand, simply can't hide the truth from himself. Not about what he does to suspects, not about God and his infuriating lack of existence, and least of all about his daughter and his failure in preventing her death. Death in the family and the guilt that it brings is a subject I know nothing about, so obviously talking about this doesn't affect me emotionally at all. I've never suffered from depression, so it's all good, bro, truly. But a friend of mine once told me about his experience being a child in a Shiva, the Jewish 7-day mourning period. My friend told me that he noticed that when people spoke of the deceased, which passed away awfully young and in literally tragic circumstances, they uttered many statements that were demonstrably false, even self-contradictory. Even as young and technically minded as my friend was, my friend deduced that taking a step away from the truth served an important function in relieving the intensity of the grief. Back to Cohle, who seems to be really good at detecting lies. As he tells Papania and Gilboa, he never spent more than 10 minutes in a room with a suspect without knowing whether or not they did it. This unrelenting, involuntary even, detection of truth is what makes him unable to lie to himself. It even makes him a better liar because he isn't biased towards believing his own lies. That's what makes him so interesting. Marty, in comparison, is a much more boring character. Except for moments where he defends Rust even though he hates him, Marty is almost never interesting nor likable. Not to me, and probably not to you either. If I had Marty on the thumbnail of this video, I think it would have gotten a significantly lower number of views. But why is that? Before we go back to episode 4, let's think like scientists for a second. Why does the inability for self-deception make Rust so much more interesting? And on this question, I'm going to end the first video. I thought I could do the entire season in one, but the more I got into it, the more I realized how everything connects to one cohesive theme, from the lying and the child abuse, to the absence of God and the villain, which is just the perfect villain for this show. So I decided to expand this to a series of 3 20-minute videos. The next one is going to come out in a week, and the last one in the series a week later. If you want to be notified by YouTube when these come out, you know what to do. Also, if you like what I do here and want to make me a little bit happier, consider reading one of my short stories. They're free on my website, there aren't any ads, I just want more people to read them. I put a link in the description to a story that deals with similar themes to the ones we talked about in this video. Thank you to all of the beta viewers who watched a slightly worse version of this video and told me what they thought. Goldfinger, Duck, Yuval, Dan the Learner, Raya, and of course Shani. Thank you for not letting me lie to myself. Until next time, you stay honest, you hear?